Thank you very much for staying with BizCheck here on KBC Channel 1. My name is Betty Kiptum. Now, for the next 40 minutes or so, we shall be having a conversation about debt sustainability in Kenya, including the investment of infrastructure, or rather investment of debt in infrastructure. And to have this conversation is Wanjiru Gikonyo. She's the National Coordinator of the Institute of Social Accountability. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Betty. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Let's just give you a little bit of numbers. According to the Central Bank of Kenya, as of June 2021, Kenya's debt totaled 7.7 trillion shillings. External debt is at about 4 trillion shillings and domestic debt is at 3.697 trillion shillings. Kenya has hit and surpassed the debt ceiling almost 3 times now, is it?
Yes.
Yes, and moved by the legislator.
Mm-hmm.
How is this looking for Kenya?
Beyond the numbers, and reading the language of the CBK,
yes,
the report that was released, I think it was in August, which was an extraordinary report. There was also a report by the Senate, by the Auditor General, presented to the Senate on the issue of public debt. There is also the Treasury that's been going back to the external markets, to the domestic market periodically. All the language is it's proving, it's demonstrating what is feared, that Kenya is in a debt crisis. We know that. Kenya is in debt distress. We also know that, and we can see that. But I think from the point of view of the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, which we coordinate, which we are members of, we feel that we've moved beyond a debt crisis to an economic crisis, because we've got escalating debt. Almost 76% of the tax that we're collecting is going towards debt repayments. That means we don't have enough. In fact, something like 87% of the consolidated fund is going towards debt repayments. You know, and yet government continues to spend on large infrastructure projects, some of which have been questioned because they are not productive, they are not giving returns. Kenyans have fallen deeper into poverty. Our competitiveness on the regional market that was being discussed before here is falling. So our exports are falling, our imports are up. Employment is, the quality of employment is down. Our manufacturing sector is down. Foreign direct investment is down. And these things are linked to the debt crisis and the policies around it, and really irresponsible spending by the Jubilee administration.
Okay, let's start here. How did we get here? Because the debt service to tax revenue ratio increased from 30%, that was in 2013 to 2013-14 financial year, to about 49% in 2020-21. In the year 2019-2020 financial year, we borrowed 886 billion. We paid 718 billion in terms of debt servicing. So we are doing a lot of work in terms of collecting taxes and sourcing for funds from the domestic and external markets to pay our debt. Is it sustainable?
It's not sustainable. Of course, it's not sustainable. When the
IMF keeps saying our debt is sustainable.
Well, it's based on the indicators they use.
Okay.
And with regard to the Imf indicators, a couple of things have happened. Number one, Kenya has breached 3 of them, 3 of the 4. The other thing is that the proposed public finance management amendments propose to change the way we measure debt to an extent. And then the data used is questionable. So the IMF and the central bank are relying on different sets of data. So we conducted a study reviewing the fiscal consolidation program, and we found the IMF is missing the political economy. And they rely on Treasury. A lot of assumptions are based on discussions with Treasury, promises of Treasury. Now, the Treasury, the government, the executive is the one borrowing. And they are the ones negotiating with the IMF. They are the ones painting the rosy picture of our economy. And we are saying, well, why don't you use the CBK data? We worked with a team of experts from Kenyatta University, and their own data said, no, this debt is not sustainable. We can see it's not sustainable because of some of the indicators. You know, this rapid borrowing, the debt trap shows that it's not sustainable. In fact, the government, the present administration, is just kicking the can, you know, down the road, just keeping things floating. So the incoming administration will have a nightmare because we have a lot of commercial debt, which is not negotiable. You know, unlike the multilateral debt, a lot of the multilateral lenders and some of the bilateral lenders agreed to, you know, a moratorium period in terms of interest repayments because of COVID. But the Chinese debt, which is significant, the commercial debt, the Eurobonds, the syndicated loans, those aren't negotiable. And government is still going back into the Eurobond market. So how did we get here? The bottom line, in very simple language, we got here because of irresponsible borrowing and money borrowed and put into projects of low productivity, and then the policies to remedy the situation, some of which may be implemented in goodwill. Our view is some of those remedies are not working. Irresponsible borrowing is between 2014, 2015, 2016, there was very high borrowing. The first Eurobond, you know, the Chinese debt, the SGR. SGR loan was a significant part, you know, percentage of the GDP. I think it was almost something like 7-8%. One borrowing. And it wasn't the only one. So the administration had a wish list, promises to Kenyans. So Kenyans need to be very wary of promises. And it tried to fulfill all these promises at the same time. And then there were some big ticket items that were overcosted. SGR were the wrong solution. SGR was a wrong solution. World Bank, Parliament, civil society recommended rehabilitate the existing line, like they've done with the Naivasha-Malaba route. 3.5 billion versus 350 billion for the first leg of the SGR. In fact, Kenyans need to demand their money back. So expensive borrowing going to China, we haven't seen the contract, but if you look at the Treasury reports, the interest rates are at commercial rate, and you also had China gave a 6-month moratorium. They're not giving more than that. Also the Eurobonds, very expensive borrowing on very expensive terms. And what we understand, because the contracts are not available, unfortunately, Parliament has been approving the debt ceiling. And beyond that, they complain like we do. Oh, we don't know what the terms are.
That is baffling, because, I mean, what are Kenyans to do if the body that is there to protect them keeps failing them 3 times now?
Exactly. So we borrowed expensively, imprudently, put it in possibly white elephant projects. SGR is losing money. If you looked at the other projects that we borrowed, you know, how are they doing? So where did the money go also matter. So when you're borrowing, you also need to ensure, you know, the money that there are going to be returns. What else is ailing us? There are structural problems that this administration didn't create that were there. Majority of Kenyans are employed in the agricultural sector that has low productivity. Why this administration isn't investing more in agriculture? You know, those are the questions we need to ask. Those are the interests in the budget. So there are structural problems. There are structural problems in the domestic market. So borrowing domestically is extremely expensive. And those are issues that have been on the table for reform. There are gaps in our budget. So budgeted corruption. So this is why I say we don't only have a debt crisis, we have an economic crisis because of the conflation of these challenges. Budgeted corruption, which is inflating projects, the cost of road per kilometer. So we have the problems at many levels. And then, like you say, Parliament. why has Parliament given the administration a free ride? That is, I think, the scandal is the executive has undermined the law, subverted the law, but Parliament has allowed them to do it. On one hand, there's possibly gaps in law, but then it really comes down to basic accountability. And Parliament has let us down. Kenyans also don't hold their political leaders to account on the right things. When we see our political leaders, we're asking for jobs. We're asking for handouts. There is a cost to not holding our political leaders accountable. So this debt crisis, unfortunately, is impacting businesses, small traders, households. You know, we saw the KNBS data, contrary to the rosy picture we've been getting from the World Bank and the IMF, saying that we have, I think it was 28 million more Kenyans have fallen into poverty between 2013 and 2018 before COVID. So we've had a mismanagement of the economy, and we need, as Kenyans, to realize that our political choices have economic consequences.
Yes, they have
and
to
make
be connected,
sure
those two.
We hold our political leaders accountable.
Yes.
And choose the right political leaders, not just based on their promise. So I think this is a moment for political education and a moment for us to evaluate what went wrong.
Yes, it's very important to look back in the journey. Now, let me ask you, what is the way forward? I mean, what are the options for Kenya? If this is done, this will happen. If this is not done, this will happen.
Yes, we do have options. The first option is to cut the deficit, because our deficit is at around 7.6 to 8.6%. That is extremely high. Experts tell us the deficit, the budget deficit, the difference between what we are spending and what we generate as revenue shouldn't be more than 4%. And this is before, you know, before we consider where the money is going. So we are saying, even if the money was going into viable projects, which it's not, even if the money was borrowed at an affordable rate, which it's not, unfortunately, even before the corruption, the deficit shouldn't be that large, because then it has macroeconomic impacts. It distorts the economy. And this pressure is seen a lot with the overtaxation. So taxation is one of the problems and one of the opportunities. What's the opportunity? In our view, we need more progressive taxation. So taxation should be based on ability to pay. Those who earn more should pay more, so that we can have more equality, equity. We also need to seal the tax loopholes. Now, government is trying to pass the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is a good thing, to seal money laundering and these losses, that revenue losses due to illegal repatriation of funds and things like that. But then you need basic accountability between the revenue point to the collection point. Transparency is very important, but we do not support overtaxing those who are already paying. To seal the loopholes. We also have a lot of exemptions that are political. Oxfam did a study and saw big businesses, you know, big formations that are negotiating for tax exemptions, negotiating against the taxation of wealth. In fact, our study found the problem is that we are taxing incomes instead of taxing wealth. Taxing land, for instance, the stalled land reforms, the land register, transparency around land, and who owns land, and what's the link of the owners of land to policy making. So those
land is a very thorny issue in this country.
And I think land is a thorny issue, but it's also our solution. In that land has to be accessible to all. Majority of Kenyans are in the informal sector. There's a big push to formalize them. You can't formalize unless you have access to land. So land is that discussion, that agenda for discussion of the post PV, of the 208 conversation has to come back on the table. The issue of land justice, land transparency and accountability, and the role of counties, because counties are now the ones holding this land. And unfortunately, there's still corruption around land. There's still interest around land. So one is, let's look at taxation. Let's look at our sources of revenue. The other thing is the parastatals, state-owned enterprises, the Kenya Airways and all, that are draining our coffers with unfounded and possibly even illegal bailouts. And we have a situation where public money is going into private pockets through these repeated bailouts. We have deals made by government around, for instance, Kenya Power. We've seen this big conversation around the independent power producers. We got into a very bad deal at a time when we were in a very bad situation, and it's a deal we can't get out of. And the cost of power is making Kenyan goods uncompetitive. Yes. So we need to deal, these are the structural problems we need to deal with. We need to deal with linking the informal sector to the external market. And this is about looking at the value chains. For instance, if you take, people are talking about potatoes, or talking about whatever produce that we grow. And you've seen this discussion coming up in tea, you've seen it in coffee. Of course, those sectors pushed out the smallholder farmers. But we're looking at agriculture, and how do you ensure that the farmer or the small trader is linked to the formal market and to the larger market and to the opportunities out there, because there are so many barriers to this sector. And a lot of those barriers have to do with overregulation, have to do with the political economy, which is interests, big business, or the links between politics and business. So we have to deal with the regulation and those opportunities, so that a lot of us get, a lot of our, especially households, rely a lot on small businesses, the informal business. So those businesses need to be given an environment to grow. The other thing our study found is we need the right type of macroeconomic policy. Now this is an issue that's not often discussed, but you know, we have an exchange rate that's making our goods uncompetitive. So there's a need for Parliament to pay attention and say, look, how since 2015 have our goods been becoming less competitive? Why are we losing market? How do we ensure we have an exchange rate that makes us competitive and protects you know, us from toothpicks flooding in?
From eggs, external markets.
You know, from external markets. It's not, you say it's not sustainable. It's not sensible. It's really, we're killing our own business and our own livelihoods. So the other, of course, the big reform agenda is corruption. And I don't even think it's a reform agenda, it's a transformation agenda. We have to get the cost, we have to open up how we choose projects. There are projects that should be stopped. We need to actually look at SGR. It's losing millions a day, losing billions every month, yet government money is going there. We are still paying the debts. KQ, losing money, we are still bailing them out. We need to actually just take a hard look and say, how do we bring in private actors? If we do bring, you know, some private owners, how do we ensure access, especially if it's like the SGR? How do we ensure access for the average Kenyan? Because you don't want to overcost, because there are structural problems there. So we need to really look at the state-owned enterprises and reforming them. And then lastly, we have to look at, you know, and this is why I was talking about the Anti-Money Laundering Act that unfortunately is stuck. There's an injunction by the LSK against the operationalization of this act. It's a very important act because you want to be able to scrutinize private, the interaction between lawyers, business, at the point of service delivery, to ensure we track corruption, because corruption has become very sophisticated and you need to be able to track and control the money. So maybe the very final thing is we need a culture change.
Okay.
As Kenyans, we need to embrace our constitution. It's a constitution based on good governance. It's a constitution which gives us the power, gives responsibility to government, but also to citizens. And until we become active citizens, holding leaders to account, electing good leaders, being dutiful citizens who pay tax and demand accountability, until we move from the dependency to the agency and empowerment, unfortunately, Kenya is going to lose out. We're going to lose out regionally. I mean, we've got wonderful infrastructure, and I think we are an economic hub, but our leaders have really destroyed a lot of what has been built. In the last, this administration has really destroyed a lot of what has been built. And I think what we have to recognize is we can lose this vantage position that we enjoy. And our life, the cost of living has gone up. We saw KNBS told us the cost of basic goods means that there's a good life for a few, in the professional sector, private sector, but the majority are living a life of deprivation. So when you're saying over 50%, I think it was 52% below the poverty line, then it's not sustainable.
Right. Yeah. The government has quite a number of projects going on right now. There's going to be a change of power in August, depending on how the election goes. So what is your view in terms of now spending in these projects? The current government is scrambling to finish up some of these projects. Of course, there are some politicians who use village roads to every other campaign cycle, yeah? So what is your view in terms of how the government should handle these projects?
One is we need transparency around the projects. Parliament has asked for the last 2 years for the list of projects. They haven't received it. They get general infrastructure. Some of the big ones, of course, are in the budget, but the details aren't there. When you need to go into the viability, the accountability, details aren't there. So one, transparency. Number two, some of these projects are laden with illegalities and unconstitutionalities and corruption. All those, the projects that have corruption in them should be stopped, audited. Those who are, implicated should be dealt with accordingly. And if they are to be resuscitated for the sake of, maybe for the wider good, the economic benefit, it should be in that basis. So unless we deal with the problem of projects, and I'm very concerned when I hear both of the major contenders saying we are going to continue with these projects, because those projects are vehicles for corruption. When we talk about state capture, Auditor General Edward Ouko talked about budgeted corruption. And he said corruption is being budgeted into the projects that get approved. So we have to stop corruption projects if we are going to save Kenya's economy. Otherwise, whoever comes in, really what we are saying is that we are just, they say different forests, it's same monkeys. So, we are changing our electoral process, but the political culture is exactly the same. So we need, when we went for a new constitution, we wanted to overhaul the way we did our governance. We wanted Kenyans work hard, Kenyans are industrious, in government, in private sector, in informal sector, Kenyans work hard, and we are taught from the early age, work hard. Put your best effort, but that is dissipated because of corruption. And so corruption is becoming the way people see, this is how I'm going to get along. I need to know somebody. That is not sustainable. So we need to stop those projects. I think the other thing is that there are some public finance management gaps that need to be dealt with, but the main thing is the political will. And so far, actually none of the contenders are talking about corruption, dealing with budgeted corruption, dealing with the projects. So we can safely say we are going to have a continuation of the same unless Kenyans disrupt this process and say corruption has to be an agenda, and if it's not your agenda, we're not going to vote for you. Okay. Especially, and let me just say, this corruption and the projects problem is also at the county level, and Kenyans need to recognize they have a lot of power at county level. Maybe at the, when you're looking at presidency, you can't influence as much, but at ward level, Kenyans have so much power. Not only that, if you get a bad MCA, get a bad governor, it means for 5 years you're going to live in terrible conditions.
Yes, some counties are actually ahead of others because of that.
Exactly. So Kenyans should reject 6 P's. Reject. Be selfish and vote for good leaders. And say, this is your homie for the next 5 years. So Kenyans need to, look at what's the credentials of this person. Did they run down the business that they were running before? Are they thieves? Are they rapists? Are they murderers? And much as they may not be prosecuted in court, if they've been indicted in court and there are very strong allegations, leave them, let them clear their issues before you agree to vote for them. So we need, Kenyans voted for a transformation. We've lost the momentum, but we have small ways in which we can get that momentum. So let's learn from the people who voted for good governors and good MCAs. Yes. Let's do the same.
Let's do the same. I think it's very important, even as we head towards election time, for Kenyans to have this knowledge. Now, for the government that is coming in, and picking up this debt and the infrastructure projects that may not be finished, what is in it for them? What can they do to better the situation?
In fact, one of the other problems they'll have to deal with is the wage bill in a way, but it's the pension. The pension, the International Budget Project has been tracking the Kenyan wage bill, and they flagged about 4 years ago the issue of the pensions. And indeed, the pensions are growing, at a very high rate because they compound. And Parliament has not paid attention. In fact, Parliament has been extremely irresponsible. The Office of the Presidency has also been recruiting very hard, the national government recruiting very hard, and this wage bill has been growing across the board. So the incoming government, one thing it will need that we didn't have, unfortunately, with the Jubilee administration, because they didn't understand the type of constitution we have, is they need to work for more cross-partisan engagement. We've seen what's happening in the States when the Republicans and the Democrats are at loggerheads. They can't get things done. And this is almost what happened, except here the opposition eventually capitulated and decided to join the administration. But we need more cross-partisan support because we have structural problems that are bigger than any administration. So with the issue of debt, we need a sober government. There's an education even to Kenyans because Kenyans only understand projects. And, politicians will say, well, if I don't give projects, my people don't understand. But I think it's this political culture of promises. So the administration needs to be sober, needs to relook at the projects, needs to relook at the macroeconomic policies, the fiscal policies. We had a conversation with stakeholders mid last year, and we actually said we need an economic rescue plan that looks at the next 5 to 10 years and identifies these issues. So you bring business on board, you bring civil society, you bring citizens on board and say, look, this is our country. We've done well, but we need to do better. But if we proceed with the idea that government is going to dish out promises, and I want to say something about social protection, because the Jubilee administration has done very well in terms of social protection. Well, has done well, I'll say, because there are still loopholes, unfortunately, and there's still corruption, money for the elderly, money for the vulnerable. You know, we're looking at about over 3% of the budget, which is pretty good. But this money is then masking the fact that there are inadequacies in terms of supporting the informal sector. So there are some people who have gone into social protection who should be in the productive economy. And so apart from, as part of this economic rescue, we need to encourage counties to have enabling policies at the county level so that the informal sector is able to, is organized, is accountable, but is part of the economy and is linked to the market opportunities so that there is growth. We need democratic voice, even within, for instance, markets are really important for the informal trade. There are market committees. We need these to be very accountable and democratic. So part of the economic rescue is also saying that where economic groups congregate, where sector groups congregate, like the unions, the associations, there needs to be democracy. They need to be supported. We've seen a breaking of the teachers' unions, for instance. Unfortunately, the labor unions lost it a long time ago. We've seen a breaking of unions in the university. This is not healthy for our democracy. We need strong unions, strong associations, strong protections. We need accountability there, and we need inclusive economic policies. Yes,
Wanjiru, I think this is a very good conversation. We should have had more time or find more time to discuss it. And I'll just give you 3 sentences. Talk to a Kenyan who is watching and what they can do to improve this situation. That's your camera.
Kenyans, we have the power. Sovereignty is vested in us. Let us exercise our power responsibly by choosing the right leaders, leaders who are accountable, and choosing leaders who will give us good service at the county level, at the MCA level, at the governor level, at the MP level. The choice is ours, and the power is also ours.
Awesome. The choice is ours, the power is also ours. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
I have been with Wanjiru Gikonyo. She's the National Coordinator of the Institute of Social Accountability. We have been talking about infrastructure development through debt and just how that is impacting us directly, your pocket directly. Well, I hope you've heard what she said. Be a responsible voter and vote for your future. You have the power. My name is Kiptum. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Bye-bye.